This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Hi everyone, welcome back to today's episode of Coronial. My name is Emma.
I'm Georgie.
And I'm Alice.
In today's episode, we will be discussing the coroner's inquest into the death of David Black. This one's quite a technical inquest, so at the start of the report, the coroner made a special note that although this inquest discusses the technical nature of the incident that led to David's death, focus should not be lost on the fact that David was a person and that his friends and family have been deeply, deeply impacted by his death. So on that vein, we'll start off with a little bit of background about David. After high school, he studied mechanical engineering and later discovered his passion for flying. By working on his family's property, he earned the money to pay for flying lessons and he eventually obtained his pilot's license. He was married to his wife for 12 years and together they started a successful small business in aerial applications, which provided aerial services to the agricultural industry and to rural communities in New South Wales. David enjoyed the company of his family and many friends. He also enjoyed music, appreciated good food, and had a particular weakness for junk food. Which I loved.
Yeah, I'm like...
That was in the coroner's report. Yes, if you could see the current state of the coffee table right next to us, you would see that we also have a bit of a weakness.
Tim Tams, Doritos, jelly lollies.
TV snacks.
Yes.
All the good stuff. So David and his wife had 3 young children, and the coroner remarked that it appeared that they had worked so hard in life to get to a stage where their business was successful, their family was nurtured and cared for, and that they were able to enjoy life, which made David's sudden passing all the more heartbreaking. Finally got to a stage of life where everything was just aligned for that to be taken away, which is always very upsetting. So on the 19th of October 2013, a fire broke out in the Budawang National Park, which is an isolated mountainous area about 37 kilometres west of Ulladulla in New South Wales. Strategies to contain the fire were employed using a fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters to bomb the fire ground. This process involved the deployment of fire retardant from the air to the ground to contain the spread of the fire. These bombing runs were conducted between the 19th of October and the 24th of October 2013. So as I said, David owned and operated a company that provided aerial application services to the agricultural industry, which also included providing aerial support to the New South Wales Fire Service. Mm-hmm. At the time of the fire, David's company had a fleet of 14 aircraft, one of which had the registration VHTZJ, which I'll now refer to in this episode as TZJ.
Okay.
On the 21st of October 2013, David flew TZJ from his company's base at Trangie Airport to Nowra. He conducted 3 firebombing missions that day and then another 6 missions on the following day, so on the 22nd of October.
What a champion.
On the morning of the 24th of October 2013, David took off in TZJ from Nowra Airport to conduct a firebombing mission about 62 kilometres to the southwest of Nowra. He had already undertaken a brief flight about 20 minutes earlier in order to dispose of water that had been stored in the aircraft's hopper overnight before returning to the airport so it could be loaded with fire retardant. Another firebombing aircraft with 1 pilot and a support helicopter with 2 crew and 1 observer were also involved in this particular mission. Once the team reached the area of the fire, the helicopter marked the target area by hovering overhead of the target. David acknowledged the marked target location and advised the team of his intended flight path. He manoeuvred the plane to approach from the southeast with the intention to attack the northwestern corner of the fire. He made a wide turn to the south of the target of the fire and levelled out approximately 100 feet above the tree line for a straight line approach to the target area.
And I assume the helicopter is hovering further up than they're then dropping.
Yeah, and they're then dropping below. Yep. That's right. As TZJ leveled out, or immediately afterwards, the left wing of the aircraft folded up and detached from the fuselage.
Oh, what?
Can that can happen?
Folded up? As in, like, it pivoted 90 degrees from the horizontal.
So
yeah.
we'll get into the sort of the structure of the wing.
Okay.
But it's basically made of 3 pieces running lengthways.
Yeah.
And it just folded up and completely
That
detached.
is not ideal.
No.
I like my wings to be attached to my planes.
Me too.
Specifically when I'm in them.
Yes.
I mean, for everyone's sake. It's,
And that they're off the ground.
yeah.
I guess if they're on the ground,
If they're on
whatever. The
ground.
wings can be wherever.
Yeah, that's right. So, of course, the detachment of the wing caused the aircraft to roll to the left, invert, and rapidly descend, crashing into the terrain. And David was fatally injured in the incident.
That's horrible.
A little bit terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Like, yeah, because I mean, and I assume you're going to go into detail, but yeah, what do you do in that situation? How do you navigate your way as safely as possible? You probably don't have a lot of
He was only 100
mechanisms
feet
offer. Yeah.
above the ground at this point. So
So-
by the time you probably work out what's actually happened,
It's too late anyway.
Yeah, it's too late. At that altitude, I'm sure
Yeah.
if it's higher altitude, a different story, but I don't necessarily
Yeah,
know if
fair.
how different the outcome would be.
I did think that you were going to say that the 2 planes collided midair, but they didn't.
Is it going to be heat related? The reason why no. Okay. I was just like, was there an impact by like just the environment that they were in? But no. Okay.
No. So the accident was investigated by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, which is the ATSB, in conjunction with the local police. The investigation was lengthy and comprehensive, and on the 15th of February 2016, the ATSB published its final report, which identified a number of safety issues arising from the accident and actions taken since the accident to address those issues that were raised. The coroner explained that the inquest was not meant to replicate the work of the ATSB, nor review its investigation and findings. The majority of issues identified by the ATSB report had been largely rectified by the relevant agencies or were in the process of being addressed at the time of the coroner's inquest. And for that reason, the coroner's inquest only focused on specific issues that the ATSB report was unable to consider. So we're not looking at, every single factor that potentially led to this accident, just a few narrow ones that weren't addressed by the ATSB.
Yeah. Okay.
At the inquest, there was no objection to any of the evidence regarding the ATSB report or to the report itself. And because of that, the coroner decided not to repeat the matters contained in that report, except where they were specifically related to the issues which the inquest investigated. I have also not reviewed the ATSB report. As I understand, it would probably be, if this report has anything to go by, it's going to be even more technical in nature. And I'm also not even sure if it's publicly available. But it could be.
It's also probably moderately lengthy.
I think it was like 104, 105 pages. So yeah, like decently lengthy. So TZJ was a variant of the M18 Dromader, which is a low-wing single or 2-seat agricultural aircraft designed and manufactured in Poland by a Polish company. There are 3 main variants of the Dromader. TZJ was the M18A variant and was manufactured in 1984. David's company purchased TZJ and it was imported into Australia in 2004 in a disassembled condition, and it was later reassembled in Australia.
Oh, this is giving me flashbacks to assembly of show rides.
Yeah.
It very much felt like that's what it really reminded me of. This particular
okay.
case was just, that show ride one.
And I assume it was reassembled by a company or a person who was knowledgeable and
I can
they were
tell you
trained.
now the reassembly has no bearing
On
on
it.
anything.
Yeah, okay. So someone played the jigsaw correctly.
Yeah, that was all done correct. And remember, this is back in 2004. The accident happened in 2013. So it had,
And are you going to tell me about the expected longevity of this type of plane?
it goes a little bit into that. I'm assuming that was something that was more discussed by the ATSB side of thing, but there is a little bit of that in here as well. So there's not much known about the aircraft's 20-year history before it was imported into Australia, other than that it had reported total service time of 3,031.4 hours at the time it was imported.
Did it tell you about, is that
normal?
What's an average number of hours of a plane
So
across a
we'll
20-year
go
lifespan?
into that a little bit later, but I think for this particular aircraft, it's longevity is about 6,000 hours.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
it's not
halfway
it's,
through.
It's halfway through its
It's
life.
midlife. Yeah.
So serviceable wings from another M18 aircraft were fitted onto TZJ at the time it was reassembled in Australia. Again, has nothing to do with the incident. And it was reported the attachment fittings on the wings were also replaced at that time. That is foreshadowing.
Ooh.
Hang on, sorry. Attachment
We'll get
wings?
into what all of it means.
Okay, cool,
'cause
cool.
At the moment, it's probably not going to mean a whole lot.
Yeah.
So according to the logbook, the replacement wings had a total time in service of 3,021 hours. So that's 10 hours less than the fuselage had. So basically,
Same.
pretty much exactly the same
Okay.
Yeah.
time in service. TZJ was later modified to increase the capacity of the hopper and to upgrade its engine and propeller. The hopper's just where it stores like the fire retardant and other
Yeah.
stuff that it needs for the firebombing missions. So M18 aircraft have what's called a cantilever wing, which consists of 3 sections, the center wing section and the left and right outboard wing sections. The outboard wing sections are attached to the center section at 3 points, an upper and a lower attachment point on the wing's main spar, and a third attachment point at the rear. So a spar is the main support structure within a wing. So if you think about it as being like the spine
Yep.
of a
yeah.
wing running from the fuselage straight through to the tip,
Yep.
and then it has like ribs, I guess,
Yep.
coming off of it as well.
Perpendicular to the main spine-ish type
Yeah.
angles. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
right, sort of coming off. So that's what sort of like looks like a wing looks like internally. So the upper and lower attachment points, so at the top of the spar and at the bottom of the spar, if you think of it as a spine.
Yep.
Yep, where it
But
attaches to the
But
plane.
the podcast can't say that, but that's great.
Well, I don't know how to explain that better. Like on top of the spar and underneath the spar.
Fine.
So if you think
Yeah.
of on top of the wing and then
Yep.
underneath the wing,
Yep.
there is an inboard fitting attached to the center wing section and an outboard fitting attached to the outboard wing
Okay. Yep.
section. So there's 2 attachments.
Yep.
Both sides, one above, one below, basically.
Cool.
There is a single lug on the
No.
outboard fitting.
I love how much it is.
There needs to be more lugs.
There is a single lug on the outboard fitting, which is secured between 2 lugs in the center wing. So,
There are more lugs. It's fun.
as you all know, lugs are protruding pieces of metal used to attach a connecting element.
Yes, I definitely knew that.
So the lugs are secured by an expandable mandrel, which is basically an expandable rod. So you think about like a TV antenna that you go,
Oh, so it's not.
it's not fixed.
No, but also it's a length expandable because haven't we have like expandable anchors or something where like it's actually once you screw it in, it like widens
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah,
But you're
no,
saying it lengthens.
It's a lengthen
Okay.
thing. Yeah. So when the mandrel is expanded, it basically prevents movement in the joints between the center wing and the outboard wing. So obviously with wings, you want some sort of flexibility at some times in order to
Yep.
help it, the lift and the drag and things like that. But at certain points, you want it to be secure. So the mandrel is designed to transfer loads from the out wing fitting to the center wing.
Yep.
However, because there's not secondary load paths, failure of an attachment fitting will result in the loss of the aircraft's structural integrity on the wing.
You do not want that.
Which, yeah, no, you don't.
So again, are we saying there's one single point that could just result in entire failure?
Yes.
Single point failure is bad in anything.
When you said you want more lugs, I want more antennas, please.
Well, there are 3 antennas, but failure of one antenna
does destroy the whole
obviously
thing.
yeah.
But
yes.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
suboptimal.
Yes, that's right. Remember, these aren't the commercial airplanes that you and I fly in either. Let's
Yes.
just also
Okay,
remember.
that is actually really helping me.
It's a small little 1 or 2 seater plane, like tiny. So remember, like they're nowhere near as big. I'm sure there are a lot more attachment joints and attachment fittings
More
in the
lugs.
planes, a lot
More
more
lugs.
lugs in the planes that you and I fly on.
Yes.
On a
Okay,
day-to-day basis, but also good to know. Not that I'll ever be flying in a single seater plane
No.
because I don't know how to fly a plane. So at the initial examination of the aircraft at the accident site, it was found that the outboard left wing had separated at the center to outboard lower wing attachment joint. This was caused by a fracture in the outboard wing lower attachment lug.
Not enough lugs.
Not enough lugs,
enough
but
lugs.
so many mentions of lugs. Corrosion pitting had been formed on the inner surface of the attachment lug. This type of corrosion causes cavities or pits in the surface of metal, which had caused fatigue cracks in the lug.
And is this something that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to see, though, because it was internal?
It is. That's up for contention.
Okay.
Up for
Yeah,
debate a little
right.
bit later.
Okay.
So fatigue cracks occur when metal is exposed to repeated varying stresses, and each time stress is applied to the crack, it grows larger on a microscopic level. When the crack reaches a critical size, the remaining material is unable to withstand the applied stress and it fractures. That's your basic science behind fatigue cracking.
Like a stress fracture in a human bone.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the ATSB investigation ruled out that a mechanical defect with the aircraft or weather conditions had caused the in-flight wing separation. It was also found that pilot error had no role to play in the accident, as at the time, David was a very experienced pilot who had accumulated over 9,500 flying hours. I don't think that's necessarily a reason to be like it wasn't pilot error, because even if you are experienced,
You still can
you
make
can
mistakes.
still make mistakes.
Yeah.
That said, all evidence showed that he was flying skillfully and carefully on the day of the accident. So there was no reason to believe that it was pilot error.
Even these kinds of planes have like black boxes, or
There wasn't actually any mention of the black box in this report.
but like, isn't that the point of them? Is that they maintain a record of everything that happened so that they can tell
Yeah.
if it could have been user error or whatever.
And that's potentially a reason why they just
Said
ruled
it wasn't.
ATSB ruled this out straight
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
I don't know because I haven't
No,
read
that's
the
fine.
background report, but it wasn't mentioned in the coroner's report. So in the ATSB report, it was explained that the operation of an aircraft naturally causes stresses in its structure, but aircraft are designed in a way that these stresses do not exceed the strength of the materials the aircraft is constructed on, which is good to know.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
That said, like with any structure, stress can cause damage to materials, and the accumulated damage over time can result in significant damage known as fatigue damage. So TZJ's manufacturer used a safe life design for managing fatigue in its aircraft, which is just a fancy way of saying all aircraft have a use-by date.
Right.
So aircraft should theoretically be retired before any fatigue damage poses any risk to safety at all.
So are we saying that the fatigue damage in this aircraft posed risk to safety?
Well, yes, because it did.
But did they say, sorry, that there was no mechanical failure?
Correct, but when they say no mechanical failure, I think that's of like the actual like mechanics of, because you know how planes obviously have like an inboard computer, and the like the electronic, like the
Right.
physical mechanics of being like, I tried to lift
Right.
this
sorry,
part of the wing and
sorry,
it didn't
okay.
work. It was more like the structural.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not like
Yeah.
the engine stopped working.
Yeah. So an aircraft's service life is measured in hours, and once the aircraft meets the service life threshold for that type of aircraft, it is required to be retired from
Yep.
service. So I'm guessing that's why you will with certain fleets, like I think of Qantas, how they were like, and now what were they called? The Queen of the Skies, those big
Yeah.
737s. They're like, and now we're retiring the whole fleet. It's probably because they were forced to retire them because they were meeting their shelf life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
basically.
okay. Right.
So yeah, it's interesting. I guess it's not like cars where you can just run them as long as
Yes.
they will run,
Yeah.
But
and
you're
replace
essentially,
them.
they're getting written off.
basically.
Yeah.
But
They-
just purely because they've gone so many miles or so many
Yeah.
flying hours in this
Yeah.
case. According to the M18 structural repair manual, the service life for the airframe of the M18 and its variants was 6,000 hours, as I said before. However, with certain modifications and inspections, this limit could be extended to a maximum of 10,000 hours. Which I was like, that's a huge extension on its life.
I'd want them to be huge modifications.
Yeah, I know, right? Like it is getting new wings.
Yes. It is a whole new plane.
Yeah,
You can have some
basically.
extra 4,000
new
hours.
engine,
Yeah.
like everything. So TZJ's service hours were routinely inspected as part of an ongoing maintenance process conducted by a licensed aircraft maintenance engineer. During these tests, non-destructive testing was performed by a specialised technician. So during the non-destructive testing, the properties of materials, parts or components are inspected and evaluated for differences in characteristics in a way that does not damage or destroy the serviceability of the aircraft, which is good.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Does it go into how they exactly
Oh, yeah.
do that?
We're
Okay,
about to
cool.
get into the nitty gritty.
And I was going to say, but I liked hearing that it was an expert.
It's an expert. Yes,
Yes.
there are multiple experts
Yay.
involved. So there's the maintenance engineer and then there's a non-destructive testing technician.
Cool.
So
But it's not old mate owning a truck and being like, I
Yeah.
did all of the maintenance on a SLG.
no.
Yeah.
So there are a number of different types of non-destructive testing according to the part of the aircraft which has been tested, obviously. So we're just focusing on the attachment joint testing for the wings because that was what failed in this case. So the testing relevant to the issues in the inquest are the magnetic particle inspection and eddy current inspection. We'll talk about what they sort of mean. I won't go into too much detail because
Good.
I'm not an engineer.
Not going to lie, magnetic particle inspection sounds very made up.
We love it when like someone has a job and you're like, that's got to be made up.
Yeah, it doesn't sound real. So magnetic particle inspection is used to identify surface and near surface discontinuities in ferromagnetic metals such as steel and iron. It involves the application of magnetic fields to a part or component which will be distorted if there's a discontinuity such as a crack. So basically, if the metal has got a crack in it, it'll distort in some way. So you can visually see that something's wrong with it.
I'm basically assuming it's a big old magnet, and if you hold it there and the fuselage moves or the wing moves, you go, now we're done.
Yeah.
But how is that non-destructive then?
Well, it's non-destructive if the plane's okay.
Yeah.
And
if the plane's
but how
not
could you
okay-
label it non-destructive in the sense of
You're destroying it if it should be destroyed.
Yes.
yeah? So
You're not destroying it if it's perfectly fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
Destructive testing, I think, is when you're trying to find the limits of something.
Yeah.
Whereas this is just, is there an issue, yes or no?
Yeah.
Eddy current inspection is where electrical currents are generated in conductive material by an induced magnetic field. So imperfections in the material, such as a crack, will distort the flow of the electric current, which are the eddy currents, and cause changes in the electric field. So it's not visually, you can't see a change in the electric field. I'm assuming there's some sort of
Yeah, there'll be a reader
reader that tests, there's a distortion in the magnetic field. There's a crack.
Yeah, there'll be an output and an input, and it'll be sending its output, and if it doesn't receive its input back
then
in the
there's an
same way,
issue.
then you go, okay, this is wrong.
Something's wrong.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing that they've figured out these ways of testing.
I just want to know how big the magnet is.
That I can't tell you.
Yeah,
You have
that's
to
okay.
look it up.
I'm just picturing someone holding a giant magnet.
That's what, like one of those full-on,
Yeah, the horseshoe
Yeah, the
ones.
horseshoe magnets.
I'm imagining like an MRI where it's the whole room and it's like no one can have any metal anywhere near because they'll just like spring load to the plane, like. Anyway.
So at this point, I'm just going to go back and talk about some other incidents that have occurred with the M18 aircraft prior to this one. It's not the first time something like this has happened.
With this specific aircraft?
Specific type.
Okay.
Like the
sorry.
M18.
Okay.
Yeah. So in June 1999, an M18A aircraft was heavily damaged in a non-fatal incident when its right wing separated in flight in the United States. About 12 months later, in May 2000, a different M18 aircraft, also in the United States, was destroyed in another non-fatal incident when its right wing also separated.
So there's a
in flight.
history of the wings just falling off of these types of vehicles.
Essentially.
That
That sounds ridiculous.
It does. That's why I'm like, hang on, why are people A, still buying them, and B, like, is this a thing? Do wings just fall off of planes?
These planes, apparently.
Apparently.
How do I not? Is this common knowledge?
I assume not, because
Yeah, okay.
otherwise I don't think he would have still been flying it.
Yeah, sure.
No,
That's
that's true. And no, because I've never heard of it happening prior to reading this inquest.
Yep.
So following these incidences, the United States National Transportation Safety Bureau investigated both and revealed that the wing separations were caused by fatigue cracking in the right wing attachment lugs of each aircraft, and corrosion pitting was present in the lugs.
And these are all still like the Polish made, or were
Yeah,
they-
they're exactly the same.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And can you issue a recall of a plane at that?
Surely.
They didn't issue a recall of the plane, but in August 2000, the manufacturer issued a service bulletin warning that it's particularly critical to maintain good condition of the center wing to outboard wing attachment joints, and that any joints found to be corrosion affected must be inspected for possible cracks by magnetic particle inspection. So
Right.
specifically saying it needs to be then at this point properly tested if
Okay.
there's any concerns about the lug.
Which is what they did for this plane?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
In theory, it's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Let's find out.
In October 2000, the Australian Civil Aviation Safety Authority, which I'll refer to as CASA, issued an airworthiness directive for all M18 models requiring inspection of the centre wing to outboard wing attachment joints by magnetic particle inspection in accordance with the manufacturer's bulletin.
In what year?
October 2000, so 2 months after the manufacturer's bulletin was issued, it then became mandatory under Australian standards.
Is there a risk that if you were in 2000, they said you must do this, if you didn't own it, was it then not mandatory? That being said, it hadn't actually been put together when they got it.
No,
like you know how sometimes there's ones where like
they're retrospective, you mean?
Like was it the Holy Cow one where if they had got something new or whatever, it would have been mandatory to have done the whatever safety?
No, it was mandatory from that point in time for everything. So this inspection was required upon an aircraft accumulating 2,500 hours time in service or before the 19th of November 2000, whichever came earliest. So like that was the transition. But from that point on, every single aircraft was required to have that testing. So TZJ was last inspected 11 weeks before the accident. The inspection was carried out by a specialised aircraft maintenance company, and as part of this inspection process, this company used the services of a non-destructive testing company.
Mm-hmm.
In September 2000, the owner of the non-destructive testing company submitted an application to the Civil Aviation Authority for a particular type of eddy current non-destructive testing to be approved for inspection of M18 aircraft following the incidences in the US and the release of the manufacturer's bulletin. So the ATSB investigation discovered that the procedure found in the records kept by CASA was different to the procedure produced by the NDT company in the inquest. So basically, this NDT testing company had submitted a way to do this testing on this particular joint that they said got approved by CASA. And in the inquest, they produced the document that they said was approved by CASA, but CASA has also said that they have approved, but the documents are not the same that they've produced. So there are two different processes.
No.
So they thought they were using an approved process, but they weren't.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into the back and forth.
Presumably what CASA has approved is the correct process.
You would think. But it's not magnetic particle inspection. It's eddy current inspection, which is inconsistent with its own directive that it issued in 2000.
Yeah, right.
So it's approved something that is technically inconsistent with something else that is already released.
Right.
But we'll get into all of that.
Okay.
But just looking at the two eddy current procedures, the two different ones that one was following and thought it was correct, but then CASA produced a different one. Anyway, so the eddy current testing procedure, well, the first one is called eddy current testing procedure from dromator M18 centre section and attachment joints. It's dated 8th of September 2000, which the coroner referred into the report as the E procedure. This procedure referred to the use of a motorised rotating probe to perform the procedure with less than 40% full-scale deflection as the acceptance criteria. The E procedure was 10 pages in length and prepared on the letterhead of the non-destructive testing company and was not signed. The second procedure was titled eddy current testing of the main wing centre section attachment joints. It was also dated the 8th of September 2000. The coroner referred to this procedure as the EC procedure. It is 7 pages in length and referred to the use of a manual probe with adjustable collar to perform the procedure with less than 10% full-scale deflection as the acceptance criteria. This procedure was also prepared on the non-destructive testing company's letterhead and was signed.
What were the 3 pages that were missing?
Well, they're slightly different. So I guess the key differences were the instrument that was used, first of all, and then the acceptance criteria of whether it passed or failed. So I assume the extra 3 pages were potentially the use of the motorised instrument rather than the manual instrument, maybe.
Right, okay.
Something around it. I mean, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, all of this doesn't matter because it's not the magnetic particle testing that we're meant to use. But it's very interesting in the fact that there was this major discrepancy between the records of the company and the records of the Aviation Authority. And we'll go into the back and forth now. So obviously the coroner tried to get to the bottom of which procedure was actually submitted and approved by CASA.
Fair.
So as expected, lengthy submissions about the approval process used by CASA were made in the inquest. As part of these submissions, the EC procedure was the one that was produced. So that was the second one with the manual probe. However, in evidence given by the owner of the non-destructive testing company, he explained that he had created a number of versions of the procedure before the procedure was eventually approved by CASA. He ultimately created a version of the procedure identified as issue 3, which he sent to CASA on the 11th of September 2000. After making the amendments requested by CASA, the procedure was retitled Issue 2, which is really confusing, but anyway, and approved by CASA. And according to the owner, the approved procedure was the E procedure. So the one with the
10 pages and the automated.
Correct.
Yes.
The owner was certain of this as the E procedure contains reference to a rotating probe, which was what he says CASA requested instead of the manual probe, which is part of the EC procedure. And to support this, following the approval, the owner went and purchased a rotating probe to carry out the inspections, and he produced an invoice dated the 12th of September 2000 to support the fact that he'd gone and purchased this probe.
Interesting. But also don't backwards number things.
I know. I was like, that's so confusing.
That's very annoying.
This is like when you have a document that's like version 1, version 2.
Oh my God.
Final.
Final, someone's initials. Never write final.
No. So CASA's position was that the E procedure was never submitted for approval, noting the E procedure was unsigned and that there were errors in the document. For example, one of the pages is numbered page 10 of 9.
Excellent.
However, the owner submitted that these identified anomalies with the E procedure could not persuasively resolve the question of whether the procedure was submitted and approved because the EC procedure also contained anomalies. For example, there was no page 2.
Excellent.
Like they just missed the number.
It just went from page 1 to page 3. But it was still like a flow on of the procedure. They didn't label. There was no page 2. So the coroner noted that the ATSB investigation found that there was a lack of cross-referencing in the files kept by CASA at the time and that the approval process was fluid with a lot of different versions flying about. However, the coroner noted that the owner was unable to produce any documentary record supporting the submission of the E procedure to CASA for approval, whereas the EC procedure was found in CASA's approval records. So the coroner concluded that the submitted procedure was the EC procedure, so the procedure that CASA ended up producing.
But that's annoying though, because CASA could have just dropped whichever file they wanted in their approved folder. He was saying that they didn't approve it. I made changes and then I sent it back. But they might have just been like, oh, we never received it back from him, so we just dropped it in the approved folder, you know? Like
exactly. You don't want to speak, you know, you want to give like an organisation like that, like the benefit of the doubt, but they could have just provided what was convenient for them to provide in terms of the inquest. Like they could have had all the documents in relation to this. You just don't know.
No, but not saying that they even did anything wrong. I'm just saying that you could maybe just store it in the approved folder until a new one is submitted. So who's to say that that's the most up-to-date whatever ended up in that section, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're using the approved folder to just store everything until the last minute and then you just clear out all the old versions. You
don't know. And again, remember, this is late 2000 that we're talking about. So we also don't know what the software infrastructure was like in terms of this stuff. That said, this is what the coroner concluded, but counsel for the owner also submitted that the owner genuinely believed that the EAST procedure was the procedure.
And that's a tough one because it doesn't really matter, right?
It doesn't really matter ultimately, but it was very much that this guy got this approved and he genuinely thought that this was the procedure that was approved. And no one had ever called him out on it for the next 13 years.
Yeah.
All right, but what impact did this approval have? Big question. So the EC procedure was submitted as an alternative to the method of inspection required by the manufacturer in the manufacturer's bulletin, which was, as we said, the magnetic particle inspection. In the approval, the EC procedure was assessed and found that it would offer equivalent, if not superior, level of safety to the magnetic particle inspection, although no evidence was sort of drawn to
how you came to that conclusion.
Yeah. So the approval of the EC procedure by CASA meant that it was an improved inspection procedure for the M18. The non-destructive company owner was of the impression that with this approval, it meant that they had approval not to comply with the CASA directive, which you remember required the inspection of the outbound wing by magnetic particle inspection. So he thought because he had approval to use this procedure, it meant he didn't have to use.
That it was a do this or this, not
Correct.
a do this and this. Yeah, okay.
That's right. However, the eddy current approval occurred before the CASA directive was issued because remember, the eddy current approval, this happened in September 2000 and CASA didn't release that directive until October 2000.
Fair.
Right.
So in any event, the CASA directive would and does supersede any other approval.
Did they make that clear to anyone?
Obviously not.
Yeah.
They
that's
obviously
hard.
didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Because
it's like
otherwise, why would if he...
we've replaced this, your technique with this, not this has been added as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need you to do an entirely different test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how annoyed would you be if you went out and bought the probe with the rotator motor and then a month later they released that you have to do it this other way? And you'd be like, could you not have given me a heads up? Surely you had considered this within the month.
Yeah, it would have been
that
a train.
Yeah.
You could still do
Surely.
both though, right?
I mean, you could, but it's kind of redundant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or extra safe, either or.
Well, I guess you don't completely destroy the plane.
Yeah.
So like maybe there's some reasoning behind that you could then.
I don't know. It could potentially just be an easier test to carry out as well.
Yeah, true.
I don't know the actual sort of methodology of the testing.
Why don't you know these things, Emma?
Sorry. My eddy current testing is a bit
Lacking.
weak. So the coroner found that the eddy current inspection done on TZJ in August 2013 contradicted the mandatory requirements of the CASA directive. During TZJ's inspection in August 2013, the licensed aircraft maintenance engineer inspected the wing attachments, and during the inspection, the wings were supported by a jack, but remained in situ, so the wings weren't detached in any way, with a cover attachment removed to access the attachment fittings. The engineer cleaned the mandrel and the bore, or the lugs. They use the word bore and lugs interchangeably in this report, which is a bit annoying. He then inspected the bore and saw no evidence of corrosion or corrosion pitting. However, the engineer explained that as the wings were left in situ, the visual inspection was limited, so the entire bore surface area could not be visualised. Therefore, corrosion and pitting may have been present.
Yeah. If you can't see all of it,
Exactly.
you're not
You can't
capturing
then
it all.
conclusively say that it's not there. The manufacturer's service bulletin did not mandate the removal of the wings, so they weren't removed because there obviously are practical difficulties with removing wings.
Yeah.
The fuel needs to be drained completely from the aircraft, and electrical components need to be disconnected as well. So it's easier not to detach them.
Is it weird that I never even considered the fact that the wings might get detached on the odd occasion?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it either.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like-
I have not thought about that.
I'm like, no, I always want them to stay and remain attached.
No, but it's
But I
actually
guess-
safer for them to be detached.
Yeah.
to them.
Exactly. That's what I'm learning.
Yeah.
I'm like, actually, no, being able to see inside and do a better visual inspection is important. And I'm like,
You never know, this aircraft that you're currently flying on could have been sitting in a hangar yesterday without its wings.
yeah, and I'm just like, but when you put the Lego pieces back together, what if you get one wrong?
yes.
That's the risk.
Oh, I like flying in planes. This is not helping.
Sorry.
Nah, it's fine.
The non-destructive testing technician performed the eddy current testing on the attachment fitting following the E procedure. The technician did not have any specific recollection of inspecting TZJ. However, there were records of the test being conducted and passed. So it didn't go into any detail of those tests because there weren't huge records on
Yeah.
them.
And it makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily remember one plane
No.
out of how many you test
They said
a day.
he did like 6 that day or
Yeah.
something, so he doesn't exactly remember that plane. However, the coroner found that the testing conducted on TZJ was inadequate as it was tested using the eddy current method, which did not comply with the mandatory requirements of the CASA directive. When the ATSB examined the surface of the fractured bore after the accident, a number of corrosion pits were discovered. It was noted that there was no rust on the bore, which indicated that it had been recently cleaned, which is consistent with the recent service of the plane and what the engineer
Right.
said that he'd cleaned it.
Yeah.
The coroner found that the corrosion pitting would have been present at the time of the August 2013 inspection. It was just not visualised.
Yeah.
The ATSB found that the fatigue cracking reached a critical length of 10.4 millimetres at the time of structural failure, and there are at least 32 secondary micro cracks on the bore surface.
And that was through them doing like the magnetic.
It doesn't say how they tested it post-accident. You'd have to do some sort of testing to be able to see it. The ATSB calculated that it would take between 3,000 and 3,500 flight hours for a crack to grow from nothing to 11 millimetres before failure. At the time of the accident, TZJ only had accumulated 126 flight hours since its last service. So basically, there's no way
Yeah.
that the cracks wouldn't have been present during the service.
Yeah.
To explain why the fatigue cracking may not have been detected in this circumstance, the coroner relied on evidence from an independent non-destructive testing technician who explained that magnetic particle testing is the preferred method due to its simple application process, its sensitivity to very small cracks, and because it provides a visual indication on the surface of the part being tested. Eddy current testing is considered less effective for small surface cracks because significant random noise may mask crack signals.
Okay.
That's probably why the manufacturer's bulletin and then CASA also said maybe let's use.
But also that 10 to 40% discrepancy or whatever, maybe that's why the 10% was the better option, because if there's a 40%, that could just be noise or whatever.
Yeah, but 10% still 10%. That's still some degree of potential failure. So the use of the EC procedure versus the E procedure would not have made any difference in relation to any of these outcomes in any event. So the coroner ended up finding that the fact that there was discrepancy between which procedure was approved and was not approved.
It didn't matter.
It didn't matter it ultimately because it was the wrong procedure in any case.
Yeah.
But also it was just very interesting commentary about the record keeping.
Yeah.
And how like such a significant thing, I guess.
But every time we go through things like this and we identify stuff like that, I then put it back into my own life or my own procedures and be like, okay, I need to step up my game in terms of my document keeping.
Because it's
or my record keeping.
Easy. But it's so easy to misplace a document or mislabel a document or...
But how much in 10 years' time I'll be kicking myself if I don't keep good records. And so I feel like whereas... got the potential to be absolutely critical, such as, submitting authority records for things that are so critical, like maintenance records of a plane. Absolutely.
Yeah, that stuff needs to be correctly stored.
Yeah.
Because otherwise...
and it's hard. I feel bad for the non-destructive testing owner because he was reliant on CASA storing things appropriately. And yet, well, they're claiming that they have, but...
it was never communicated to him.
Yeah.
So you can understand why he had this reasonable belief that what he was doing was the correct thing because for all he knew, what he was doing was approved by CASA.
Yeah.
And he hadn't heard otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's just what you would assume.
Yeah.
And you can totally understand that from his perspective as well. Okay, let's jump to the findings and recommendations. So the ATSB found that wing removal was necessary to provide adequate access for effective visual and magnetic particle inspections of the wing attachment fittings. The manufacturer, as I said, did not require the wings to be removed for inspection, so the ATSB raised the issue with the manufacturer, who in response issued a service letter stating that if a person was unsure if a bore could be correctly inspected for possible cracking, then the wing should be removed.
Okay. But which is basically suggesting it's going to have to be every time, right?
Basically, yeah, because you can't be 100% sure unless you remove the wing, because obviously there's a visual obstruction in some way to be able to see the whole bore.
Exactly.
The inquest also considered the concept of aircraft service life factoring. This is a means for more accurately calculating the fatigue damage an aircraft accrues over time in service. So it relies on both the flight hours and other factors, including operation speed and weight loads, which also contribute to a plane's fatigue. In general maintenance, the aircraft's total flying time is recorded, but there is no requirement to record the service life factoring.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you were saying that, I was just assuming, okay, do they then have to disclose every single flight what kind of weight occurs on the
all
flight?
of that would be in their records, right?
Would it?
Yeah, generally you have like a takeoff weight.
Oh, okay.
And things like that. Yeah, you have to do all of that.
Yeah, okay.
Because like even, I'm not so sure with smaller aircraft, but I know there's really strict reporting standards for commercial aircrafts. That's why you cannot take off and land in a seat that's not your allocated seat, because they have all the records where everybody is sitting on the planes. And I think the plane is on like a little weight thing or something.
Oh.
Before you take off, they weigh the whole plane.
Yeah.
So they have the exact weight of the plane before you take off and stuff. So all of that sort of stuff is recorded. The coroner noted that factor time is an important measure, especially since in the case of TZJ, CASA required inspection intervals to be determined by the aircraft's factored flight time, as the aircraft carried heavy loads, which is interesting. So basically, this aircraft was required to be inspected at certain intervals based off the factored flight time, yet during the inspections, they didn't record the factored flight time. So I don't know how they were like...
That's so weird.
Yeah, now you have to wait X amount of time.
Yeah.
It's like with your car, like
Yes,
maintenance, where they're like, okay...
You write down the odometer reading
Exactly.
when you do the service.
Yeah. So I don't quite understand
That doesn't make any sense.
But anyway, Due to the misunderstanding of the applicability of the CASA approval of the eddy current, it became apparent that the non-destructive testing company had performed inspections inconsistent with the CASA directive. This in turn raised the questions of how this situation could have occurred given CASA airworthiness inspectors routinely performed inspections on aircraft maintenance organisations, and the NDT's testing company's inspection reports made it clear that they were using eddy current testing.
Yeah, CASA should have picked it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is not what we state that you have to do.
No, and it's not like the company was hiding that they were doing it.
Because
they
thought they were
doing
right.
it because they thought it was a legitimate thing that had been approved. So it was explained by CASA that airworthiness inspectors generally had little knowledge about NDT procedures themselves, and therefore the use of eddy current testing would not have raised any red flags. So I'm guessing they just have sort of a checklist.
Is non-destructive testing being done?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
versus what type of non-destructive testing is being done.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they're not necessarily engineers themselves.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't know what eddy testing versus magnetic particle inspection is.
Yeah.
On this basis, it was submitted that airworthiness inspectors should have further training on non-destructive testing. The coroner noted, as this is an audit process, consideration would have to be given about how in-depth the knowledge of auditors must be in the exact testing procedures, and he would need further evidence and consideration before he could make a recommendation in relation to what level of knowledge auditors would need.
Interesting. Is that not the coroner's job to then delve deeper into that to make that recommendation? I don't know, it seems very halfway in between.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of other sort of technical jargon that went on in this
Yeah.
particular explanation, which I didn't put in, but it sounds like it's very, very technical.
Yeah.
I do agree to some extent, but I also wonder like how much, as we were literally just saying, it would actually help
fair.
anything anyway. So
Yeah,
it's
true.
probably just like it's,
Here's some sort of semi-recommendation, consider it, and then go away and find a better solution.
yeah, if there is a better solution, go for it. If there's not, then there's not. So the coroner made 2 recommendations to the Civil Aviation Authority. First of all, that consideration be given to issuing an airworthiness directive requiring that visual inspections and magnetic particle inspections of the wing attachment joints of M18 aircraft be performed with the outboard wings removed.
Yep.
And the second, that consideration be given to issuing an airworthiness directive that aircraft factored time in service should be recorded on all maintenance releases in order to accurately determine the aircraft's time in service for service life limitation considerations.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm
Yeah.
so confused as to why that wasn't a thing.
It
Yes.
doesn't make a whole lot of sense
Yeah,
as to why
okay.
it's not recorded. And that would just, it then goes into, because yes, you've got the standard like 6,000 hours of that's your general shelf life of a plane. But of course, these planes are carrying loads of fire retardant and things. And they're going into zones where they're bombing fires and things like that. That's going to greatly impact.
Versus if you're just like going for like a casual flight.
Like a hobby flight.
Yeah.
That's going to be very, very different.
Yeah, that's right. So that is obviously going to have an impact on the fatigue that a plane accrues in its lifetime.
Yeah.
And it obviously is factored in some way. So shouldn't that be recorded?
Yeah.
So you can
Yeah.
assess, okay, this plane needs to be retired, assuming it's had none of those modifications that allows its time to be extended by 4,000 hours. Let's say its cutoff time is generally 6,000 hours, but this plane has, flown this many hours with however much fire retardant in it, which is going to cause whatever fatigue.
Yeah.
Okay, now its shelf life is only, it might be 500 hours flying time less. So that all
Yeah.
needs to be factored in. And that could have been, it didn't actually go into how many flying hours this particular plane had after it was imported.
Yeah.
Because we knew that it was about 3,000 hours at importation. We don't know.
But it was 20 years old when it was imported, and then it spent another 10 years or a little bit longer in Australia. And so therefore we can assume it's probably getting to the 4,500.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more. But again, that's where this factored service life stuff comes in.
But it's also
because-
when they bought it, would they have known any of that extra additional information, or would they literally just be getting, that's it, it's 3,500. So you wouldn't even know if that 3,500 equates to actually 4.5 when you got it in the first place.
Yeah. I understand all they knew was the flight hours, not the flight hours before. And remember, this particular plane had additions made, including its hopper, like new engine and things like that. So that potentially was an extension of its life, but it obviously wasn't used for firebombing prior to being imported.
Because surely adding a hopper, so therefore you're carrying more heavy
More weight.
things. Again,
Yeah.
does that actually bring down your life?
Yeah, there's not like a formula in place saying that, okay, this modification adds 100 flying hours, this one takes away 500. No, there's no formula like that.
It seems like there was only a formula for it to extend its life. There was never a formula to decrease its life. Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I have today for this particular episode. I hope any av geeks out there enjoyed it, and to any aeronautical engineers that might be listening, I am sorry. It was very interesting though, and definitely not something I've ever delved too much into, all the different ways that planes can be tested. But I am a fan of air crash investigations, and I've seen some real interesting little mistakes made by engineers on that program that have had some real fatal consequences. So yeah, it's kind of scary to know that like one little joint in a wing on a plane
make such
can
a
have
difference.
such catastrophic effects.
And so for this one summary though, okay, yes, they did the wrong testing. It would have been identified if they did the real one.
You can never say with 100% certainty
Yeah.
it would have been identified, but it's more likely to be identified, but also there could have been additional steps taken, which weren't mandatory, to be fair, like actually taking
the
off
wing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That could have been done.
Yeah.
That could have also assisted. But basically, yes, in summary, there was issues with the lug at the time that the plane took off and had its accident, and those issues were not picked up in the testing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.